Hey guys, it's Simon and welcome back to the Quilly crawler video log. And this week I didn't work at all on the shopping system because I worked on something else which wasn't working as I wanted it to be, and that was the effects of the game. So what I changed now is, let me switch that quickly back and then I explained what I did. So turn off sound and everything. So I improved or finalized, I would say, now the combat UI stuff. I created also now a dummy entity. Yeah, this is what comes out of it when I take the pencil into hand and draw something on my own. So those amazing graphics are then created. The reason of a dummy is that they don't deal damage, so they attack or defend, and they have I think 20,000 HP, so I can test the abilities, stuff and everything on them. And yeah, so what I did, first of all, I added the Xbox controls. So now even with a controller you can navigate through the menu, similar to the inventory where it was already supported. Then I added sounds now to the menu, so whenever you change there something, there's this little sound playing. Also when you select something, so when you select something or deselect something or move backward in the menu, there is now a sound. And also when you switch around the selection with the combat and so on. So that one was introduced. Also the selection cursor is now a little bit fading out and fading in. And in addition, there are now ability effects. So and also I fixed something with the scrolling, because before, when you had 4 abilities, then the text here below was simply outside of the table. So I fixed that now, so everything in here is now scrollable. Same for items, they now are also scrollable. So there was a visual bug, I would say. And for the spells itself, so maybe the names don't make sense anymore with the effects that I added, but yeah, let me show you. So first of all, the Firebolt. What is that? So there we have now this little fire effect in place. Then we have explosion. I don't have mana. When we heal ourselves, we now have this bubble effect and also a sound with that. And let me consume a mana potion, because then we can cast the explosion. Also the explosion now has an effect. Bam! Yeah, so that was mainly it. So I added effects, also the sound to the menu and the Xbox controls, and I fixed the scrolling. So that is what I did this week. So it's more like a little bit of finalizing of the combat user interface. And I also had to rewrite the rendering system almost completely, and that one I want to explain now a little bit. So first of all, I created a debug bounding area system, which is part of the Commons project. So in case you ever want to debug the bounding areas of your entities, then you can use now this system. And I also created a render screen for myself. And what that screen is doing, it simply renders some entities where I have a texture which is exactly my world unit. So maybe you remember that from some of my tutorials, but usually in the games, from what I know, you should always define a conversion from pixels to world units, so that in your game you really work with your own units and not with pixels, to make you independent from the graphics. And my world unit is actually now 16 pixels, so one in world units would represent 16 pixels in the UI. And what I did now with the screen is, first of all, the red texture, if I remember correctly, is a texture which is exactly 16 pixels wide and high. The blue texture, I think, is twice the height, and the green texture is half the size, something like that. And there I created now different entities to check when I scale them, so when I make them twice the size or half the size, if the texture is still rendered correctly. And there you see now, so the bounding areas are those teal colored areas around that. At the top I have the box2d entities, and at the bottom I have entities without box2d. And there you see that the graphic is now always inside the bounding area and correctly filled. And that was important because when I added effects like here, I was not able to center them correctly to like the top, to the head of that entity, or to the bottom or something, because, and now it gets a little bit complicated. So let me bring in GIMP. So assume before that was like our big daemon bounding box. So it's a 1-1 bounding box. So one world unit wide and one world unit high. And I had the daemon graphic, which was bigger actually than this bounding box. And before I did not really scale the graphic at all. So I simply rendered it like that. And the problem now is when scaling comes into place, usually this is always applied, also the rotation, not only scaling, this is always applied to the origin of a sprite. And the origin is usually the center. So if I would make that green graphic here now, scale it down, then it would scale down the entire box. How can I show that? I'm not a GIMP expert. So imagine this box gets now a little bit smaller, but according to the center. So it doesn't just go down here in the height and the width. It actually also goes down from the bottom because it goes towards the origin, which is always the center. And also if you scale it up, it goes away from the origin, which is also the center by default. I could move that origin to the bottom left corner, then actually it would work better, but still I never got the result that I wanted because it was very confusing that when the size of a graphic was not aligned, so like here the green graphic is twice the size of the red one, then it was for me almost impossible to move now or render this green texture, for example, at the top part here of the red texture. Like the healing effect, this bubble should be at the head area of the daemon, for example, and bringing that exactly somewhere here and scale it down that it's now inside here was super confusing. I think I wasted almost 2 or 3 hours on that, and then I simply gave up and rethought my approach. And I don't know actually how professional game developers do it, but what I am now doing is that I simply take whatever size the texture is. If it's 16 by 16, it's 1000 by 1000. I always normalize it according to my world unit so that this graphic, if it's bigger, it would get scaled down to fit inside a normal, in my case, it would be a 16 by 16 box because my world units are 16 pixels. And then I just scale it. And what I achieve with that is that when I create an effect, you see here these other lines of the bounding areas. So an effect is now always inside the bounding box of another entity. And then, depending on what kind the size of the effect is, I can then move it to the top, to the bottom, or to the center, for example, of an entity. And that makes it now a lot easier because no matter the size of the graphic, if it's 16 by 16, 1000 by 1000, 500 by 200, it doesn't matter anymore because first of all, I call it normalizing. I normalize it to fit it inside the bounding area of the entity where I want to apply it, and then I move it around. So that makes the math a lot easier. And yeah, what I can now do in the end is simply applying now these effects to an entity, and move it a little bit around if needed. And this is what I was working on this week. So in the end, the most important part I would say is the render system, and the code piece that I had to adjust was I think that one here. So actually in the process entity where we render then the graphics, so there I simplified it a little bit. And the important part that I worked with was that one. And also here at the top, where I called it this normalization of the graphic. So usually if it's bigger than 16 by 16, then the width and the height is greater than 1. If it's exactly 16 by 16, in my case, it's 1. So there I scale it down to fit it inside the 16 by 16 box, and then whatever the bounding box of the entity is that we are going to render, I scale it up and then move it a little bit that the bottom of the sprite is always the bottom of the entity itself, so that the graphic doesn't move below the bounding or the bottom edge of the bounding area. And on the x coordinate, I try to center the graphic wherever it is. And with that fiddling around, I in the end then got the same result as we had before. So visually nothing has changed, but in the background a lot of things have changed, and now I can correctly apply the effects of the spells or the abilities. And yeah, with that, I would say that's it, what I did this week. Took quite some time to think through the mathematical parts and how the rendering and so on, the scaling especially, is working and how to fix that. And now I have a completely different approach. But yeah, for me, it's working out. Would be interesting with people who have experience how they solve such issues, that you like align graphics of different sizes and move it to a specific location of an entity. Would be interesting how other people solved it. I solved it now like that. And yeah, that's it, I would say. And now I would really actually work starting on the shopping system, so that you can now buy something, that you can buy strength tomes, agility tomes, intelligence tomes, that you can increase your life, your mana, that you can buy other items, that you can sell the loot that you find, and things like that. So this is now really the next thing that I will work on, since now I visually improved the combat a little bit with what I had, and now that I've fixed some things like the scrolling in the combat UI and so. Okay guys, I hope I explained it well enough. Not sure if everyone understood what I meant with the problem of the rendering. If not, let me know, then I try to explain it in the comments. And other than that, wish you a nice Sunday and a good start into the next week. Bye bye guys.